Well, this week has been an interesting week, and one of the things that has been stuck in my brain this week was the email that Elizabeth sent out. And it wasn't so much the story, although the story was very moving, but the title. What was the title of that?
Beloved Sufferer.
Beloved Sufferer. That just stuck in my brain all week. Beloved Sufferer. And I thought about suffering and how blessed I am to not suffer, but then in some ways I do suffer because I am not pure. I am with sin. And I pay for those consequences. And I yearn to be closer to God, but yet I suffer because I'm not. What's a little different suffering than what this young lady wrote about, but it's still stuck in my mind. And as I thought about suffering, I also thought about this fasting season of nativity, and how as Orthodox Christians we try to practice the fasting in ways in which we give up certain types of food, in which we possibly give up Oprah, Facebook, and other things that we seem to spend a lot of our time in, and use that extra time to do some reading of the Gospels or some spiritual readings to move ourselves closer to God. And in the time that we spend in prayer. But there's another aspect of disciplines that we also need to practice, and is a story that I want to share with you today, because the story of some of the battles that I have fought in my life. Not being an Orthodox Christian all my life, I was a Protestant for many, many years. Not growing up in the church as a child, I came to the church as a young man and then had a family. So it's within that I had to come to understand what the world was all about. And I heard the many ministers say that we were supposed to tithe our God. But as a young family man, it's very hard to do, because the children were having ear infections. There was always milk needed for the refrigerator. We had the house payment and the heating bills and all the many utility things that we had going on. But I started with a percentage. And every year I increased that percentage, getting up to 5 and 6%. And it was then that something really big happened in my life. I started this business, and it had been about 3.5 to 4 years old, and we'd lost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. But this one particular incident happened that I had 2 employees. I had a secretary and I had an installer, a young man, 20 years old. And one day as he was heading down to Stanley to install an alarm system in a chicken house, he wasn't paying a lot of attention to the stoplight. And he ran through that stoplight and he ran into a mother with 2 children in a conversion van. And this was, of course, before the seat law was so popular, the seatbelt law. She badly sprained her ankle, and the child in the driver's seat head hit the windshield. Thanks be to God that they all survived. But there was pain and suffering involved, and the parents said that their son had developed a learning disability due to the blow upon his head. And then came all the things that followed with traffic accidents where the attorneys get involved. And a lawsuit was brought upon the business and myself and upon this young 20-year-old employee that I had. Having not been profitable at that time, still trying to give the 5 or 6% to the church, I was facing a $3 million lawsuit and had no way of surviving. It had gotten to the point where it was clear to me that it was just well out of my hands. And so what did I do? Being strong-willed and all that, it took all this, and finally, one day, I raised the flag and surrendered. Because I couldn't do it anymore. I had to serve God and let God take care of it. So I surrendered to God. And I came to realize that, you see, life is so simple. Because we're born naked, without a thing. And how do we leave the world? The same way we came in. So what's all this stuff in the middle? So I came to find out that everything that I have is not mine. It belongs to God. Now, when I go to borrow money from the bank, I'm going to say, hey, it's God's, not yours. That's not going to work. But it puts things into perspective, doesn't it? Because everything belongs to God. And I'm just here to manage this little bit. And last week we read in the scripture about how the farmer had this storehouse and it wasn't big enough, and he tore them all down and built bigger storehouses, and he kept hoarding and hoarding and hoarding, and he didn't share what he had with the poor. And that very day, his soul was called upon him, that he had not served the great commission that God had called of him. And I didn't want to be like that. So it was from that time that I realized that my priorities all those years had been so out of adjustment. And let me give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, our son has a contract on a house, his first house, recently married, and he needed me to go with him to see the mortgage broker. And it's such a science to visit the mortgage broker. They look at how much money he's making, how much money he made, how much money his wife made, and they know that a percentage is going to go towards the electric bill, our percentage is going to be spent heating the house, our percentage is going to be spent on the mortgage, our percentage is going to be spent on the mortgage insurance, and a percentage is going to be spent at the grocery store. And then when everything is said and done, there's 15 to 20% left, which can be spent on doctor bills, car repairs, and maybe some charitable contributions if there's anything left over. And there it is. We're living in an unorthodox economic system. Because in all of our financial institutions, it's them first and God last. And so we've been trained incorrectly. That's the whole problem. So what is it that we need to do? Well, we need to each make a budget for ourselves. Not what the person at the mortgage company says or the bank says, because they don't understand. They just don't understand. You see, first of all, this Holy Scripture says that we must give our first fruit to God, and not our leftovers. Not what's left over after finishing the doctor bills and the car repairs and the new pair of shoes and all these things. But God expects us to give our first fruit. Now that's not a big thing, because everything that we have belongs to Him anyway. So He just wants 10% back. So, as I redid my budget, I put God first, and I started tithing the church at 10%. It took years and years and years before I got to that point, but I started tithing the church at 10%. It took a realization of a catastrophe in my life, but I realized that my stuff was not nearly as important as my love for God and my commitment to God. I wanted to give God my first, my best, my first fruit before it all disappeared at the movies and on cable and car payments and all those things. See, I had to reprioritize my life. I had to make the church the first important thing. And then with everything else would come second and third and fourth and fifth. And you want to know what happened? God blessed me. He blessed me really big. Now there's still times that I struggle because I got a lot on me. I think we got 16 employees, and there's a lot of bills that come and go. But I can tell you, I am a blessed man. I realized that everything is God's, and to be blessed financially, I had to give Him first fruit. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means I make a check out to the church every time I get paid. That way I don't spend it on things that I may not need. And God takes care of those needs, because I never had a lack of anything. Somebody would bring me something, give me